Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Nikolai Kornherr. I am a consultant at Automators, a test automation consulting company based in Vienna, Austria. And we're focusing on Tosca and also open source testing. And as for the topic of today, we recently had a project with Boehringer Ingelheim regarding VEEVA CRM and mobile testing. And we will just tell you about it, tell you what we had to find, and also what the big learnings were that we took away from it. And as my guest to come in from the company side, it is Mr. Clemens Utschig-Utschig, the CTO of Boehringer Ingelheim.
Yeah, and I'm Clemens Utschig. I'm CTO of Boehringer Ingelheim. Super happy to be here in the call with Nikolai and with Automators to really present sort of our vision that we had before when we got started to see if we could actually automate really everything around our usage of VEEVA CRM. So Nikolai, your turn.
All right, so let's get started with the basics. The mobile test automation for VEEVA CRM was a project that was started last year and came to a close in February. Now it's only part of the maintenance, and the maintenance pipeline is running as was expected. And now we will go through all the steps that were needed to get us to this point today. To start off, Clemens will present the philosophy and the idea behind the project from the company side.
So, why are we doing all this? Well, as I said earlier, we wanted to introduce true full-scale automation for our global CRM system. We are pharmaceutical, so as 90+% of all other big regulated pharmaceuticals, we use VEEVA on top of Salesforce software service applications for our 20,000 sales reps, as well as for medical science liaisons and back office. And the key piece was, could we get all the testing truly automated and move away as much as we can from any manual testing to see if a new version of VEEVA actually would do what it's supposed to do with all the customizations that we have around it. On the other side, it was clear we wanted to use our BI enterprise development platform to manage the entire life cycle, really from requirement to test execution in one shot. So introduce continuous delivery into the world of SaaS applications. We do this today very successfully already for commercial off-the-shelf applications, for self-developed applications, and sort of the last missing brick and cornerstone was, could we actually also make use of all this for software as a service applications that are vendor managed, of course, but on the other side, we still have to write requirements for them, for the customizations we do, for the interfaces we build, and also we have to test against those requirements because of GAMP. And that was the base idea. The test cases, and I think this is what makes it really, really interesting, are real processes of what a sales rep, a medical science liaison, or managers do every day, right? Some of them work in a web-based front end of Salesforce. Obviously, many use iRep, the iPad version of it, and there are cases and test cases that are true hybrid, right? Where something has to happen in the web front end. Then, for example, the sales rep goes on the road, captures information, and then when back home, he logs in and continues the process. And the idea was really to mirror, as kind of really good practice, also from automated testing, what are personas really doing and not just isolated small chunks. And we talk about roughly 250 requirements that resulted in 47 automated end-to-end test cases. Next slide, please. So as I said earlier, the goal is really a continuous automation pipeline, not just for commercial off-the-shelf applications and self-developed applications, but also for SaaS systems. It's well known we heavily use Jira software, right? We have customized Jira to accommodate for requirements for functional specs, and really hence have the users define their requirements, their func specs, their technical specs and whatnot, as well as their test cases in Jira, and use also the release dashboard and custom release objects to manage releases top to bottom, from the requirement to the test. Then we are heavy users of Tricentis Tosca, of course, and we talk about that later, and also what we have learned, what we encountered when we wanted to introduce mobile testing. The clear idea: automation, 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 and of course the generation of reports and the evidence, right? So everything that is saved and executed by a Tosca agent that we have integrated fully into our continuous delivery pipeline, which is based on Jenkins, which is responsible for execution, reporting, for deployment of applications, deployment of interfaces and whatnot, if they are part of the gig. Obviously, we inject parameters, secrets and whatnot against the test cases from Jenkins, depending where we deploy to or what we test. And we have multiple quality levels that we execute to, unit tests as well as functional tests, to really have the entire GAMP risk management hierarchy available there. And last but not least, we use distributed execution as much as we could. We use the agent magic of Tricentis and have built our own wrappers around that. Why are we doing this? Pretty clear, because we don't want to have any downtimes for what people are doing in Tosca Designer and whatnot. And we use the versioning of the enterprise development platform for all the test cases. That means whatever you do in Tosca, you save, and then you export a compliant self-contained state into Bitbucket to be then picked up by Jenkins for execution. And of course, you then have not any disturbance from manual usage or manual click go testing in Tricentis. Again, all that fully integrated. It was really just kind of the last piece. Could we use EDP, not just for commercial off-the-shelf applications, but also for SaaS applications? Next slide, please, Nico. So I guess that's obvious for everyone that dialed in. What is the benefits of test automation? I mean, clear, right? Less maintenance efforts, especially when it comes to regression testing, when it comes to risk-based testing. You just have your test suite, you run it, a couple minutes later, or in our world, 5 hours later, because our test cases are big, large, and resemble real-world usage. Is the release ready to go? Yes or no? No matter if it's something that we build ourselves or that we get from the provider, right? It also creates overall higher test coverage, and with the real end goal to shift testing left to the user, right? To the one that writes the requirements, and its end also builds the test cases directly to ensure that there is no gap in between. Well, unified and standardized workflow, I think we talked about that, right? The workflow and the processes are given by EDP, by Enterprise Development Platform. And Tosca was sort of a natural step to plug into for user-based testing. While we have other means to do also code-up testing, where we use Cypress and where we use SpockJab. And of course, with all that, you have faster and, most importantly, cleanly reproducible and documented test execution. Next slide, please. So why did we go after using then Tosca for mobile testing, right? There's many other means available, and I talked about it, right? For example, Cypress. Well, Tosca is already heavily in use for SAP in our world and for web-based applications. It provided many out-of-the-box tools, especially for this idea of switching between apps, going hybrid and whatnot. The mobile engine that is available, I have to admit, is actually really cool, right? It allows to design test cases not any different from what you do in the web-based world by reading, parsing, understanding the web page, and then creating your formulas to ensure that results match, scrolling works, and whatnot, right? It's, as I said, this literally the same idea. If you get a tester being acquainted to doing web-based testing with Tosca, it's not any different for an application that runs on the iPad. And of course, we had to combine different engines in a test case, and Tosca offers that. We have some pieces that require actually API testing. We have some cases where we use HTML, and we have other cases where we use mobile testing. And all of them work together in the same test cases. And Nikolai will talk about that a little bit later, because there's quite a couple things we figured out that cost us some good grief in the beginning, right? And one of the things we needed, I said it earlier, is to switch between applications while testing, and that worked wonderfully well. So overall, I think there's a good kind of case to look at Tosca or Tricentis when you want to embark on that journey. Next slide, please. Now, I think it's over to you, Nikolai, to talk about the technical challenge we had and also the solutions that we found.
Yes, thank you very much for that, Clemens. And I will now take over to guide you through all the different things that we figured out in our journey to automating VEEVA fully. So these are just some of the challenges. So first of all, when we started the project, VEEVA CRM, the IRAP application, did not have any technical ideas. It was not very thoughtful or not very prepared to be automated by a program like Tosca. But we were in contact with the company and we actually managed to get them to retroactively put in technical identifiers and get us more access to the application so that Tosca could actually scan different elements and actually work with the application as it is intended. And by now, this is actually part of the main VEEVA CRM application. So from now on, VEEVA CRM will always be this automatable for everybody that tries to do so. Some of the other challenges included the Appium Communication. Of course, Appium Communication is needed for me on my desktop to actually steer the test cases on an iPad, which in our case was on Sauce Labs. And this communication is not always the same. So whether it's Sauce Labs or a different provider, the different calls sometimes have to be modified a bit, or just the way that programs interact with each other might not have been actually compatible. And that caused some issues. Some elements weren't able to be scanned even after opening up the application, even after giving things identifiers. There are just some elements that we couldn't get access to, and we had to figure out some ways to actually get the workflows going in a way that was usable to us. And as sort of like a last point, which is not regarding to VEEVA CRM, but to mobile testing in general, is that we only used 3 tablet devices. So instead of having a huge cloud with a lot of devices, where there's always some available and they can just pick some that are free, we only have 3 devices for the execution, for scanning, for building the test cases. And we had to figure out a way to get our test cases very, very stable and to not have any issues with performance, even though there are only 3 devices available. And I will just go into a bit more detail from all the different challenges. So first up, it's, as I mentioned, the Appium Communication. So one of the big problems was that Tosca had a bit of a different communication style than Sauce Labs, and it was a lot of communication going on, and that just made the process of actually getting the data, so the identifiers, what elements are available, the whole page source from the iPad into Tosca so that Tosca could steer it and look for the controls, very unstable at first. But luckily, Tosca offers a lot of solutions on how to manage that out of the box. So one of the basic options, as you can see on the slide, is to just increase synchronization timeouts, which just means that Tosca is more generous when waiting for information before it causes a test case to fail. And this can be set on a very low level, so it can really be chosen individually. So our online test cases actually still are very fast, but then for the mobile parts, we're able to be more generous because we know that the communication there is a bit slower. It is also possible to set desired capabilities with Tosca, which just gives some properties and some clues as to how the communication is built. Another big step was, as I said, the get page source. And that was something where the communication really had a bit of an issue between Sauce Labs and Tosca. But Tricentis and Sauce Labs have been getting together, and there is now a solution in place that will still be watched and developed further, but the communication should be a lot more stable already. And if this is a way that is used to automate further, there shouldn't be as many issues with this communication anymore. Another point that I mentioned was that some elements weren't able to be scanned. This was especially true for the login mask, and in some other places it's the case when I have a mobile device that actually locks, where I have a locked screen and I need to put in a PIN, because those masks are often not scannable because it causes a security issue. And in our case, we actually made use of the fact that Tosca can combine different engines. So in this case, we combined the API engine with the mobile engine, and we were able to, in the middle of our mobile test step, so we open the application and we navigate to certain pages, we were then able to send out API calls directly in Tosca in exactly the format we needed to, and actually log in via the API, and then only have to steer the UI elements of the actual workflow. Another way that we were able to do it, and which was used at different points when maybe an API call isn't the one viable option, is to actually click on screen. So while Tosca mainly works with identifiers of different controls and identifies objects on the application, it is also possible to just give Tosca some coordinates and give Tosca some clicks or some drags, what it should perform. And of course, in mobile, oftentimes we know how the application looks, we know where different buttons will be, and therefore we are able to just click on those coordinates and steer the application without ever needing to scan it. And this can just really help with certain objects that have very unstable controls, or maybe pages that are really big and where we don't really have a way to, in a timely manner, scan the whole page and steer it, and it's just faster to click on a button that we know is at a specific location on the screen. And finally, another challenge was only having 3 devices. With only 3 devices, when we're running test cases back to back, some might be in use because somebody's scanning a module, and since on Source Labs the iPads actually boot up and then shut down after the test case, it's not always obvious that once that my test case stops, that a device will actually be ready immediately, or maybe I will have to wait for a couple seconds or even up to a minute. Usually, the way that this was solved in other projects is to either have long static waits at the end of test cases to give the tablets time to shut down, or to have even some placeholder test cases between your actual test cases, so that you can use them as a buffer. And once again, you don't have to actually see whether an iPad is available. You can just guarantee that a device is there. But of course, that's not really a nice way to do it. And so we had a lot of brainstorming on how we could actually solve this problem and get to working with 3, and at sometimes even only 2 devices. And the way we did that is that in Tosca, it is actually possible to keep the identification generic. So as you can see in the screenshot at the bottom left, the iPad configuration in Tosca here only includes that it's an iPad with an iOS platform, and the OS version has to start with a 1, which in this case is appropriate for all the iPads. And Tosca will just pick one that is available. And also in the set desired capabilities, we can see that we have long timeouts. So if Tosca needs to wait for one of the iPads, it will for quite a long time. And this way, we were able to get it all running and all stable with only this small number of devices, which of course makes a lot of sense, and to not have static waits, but actually keep the waits dynamic so we can be as effective as we possibly could when executing the test cases. Now a bit more to the EDP pipeline and what kind of advantages this continuous integration pipeline actually gives us in our project. Here we can see one of the dashboards that is there in Jenkins and Jira that we use, and we can see that there are multiple test stages, and you can very closely monitor the results because the integration goes directly to Tosca, and we get real-time results. Whenever a test case fails, we immediately know it. We don't have to go through the reports manually. The reports are mainly there to locate errors. We get a really nice result and a really nice overview over the state of the project, even though it is done completely autonomous. Even more so, we can see here, it's the case in Jenkins. So there's an automated documentation that is created The Tosca report is something that Tosca always has available and which is very customizable. In our case, it was customized to include all the different things and properties that was needed. It also includes screenshots that we can take during the whole test case in order to ensure hard to identify and hard to verify things for Tosca still get captured and can then be verified manually by the testers, which still cuts down the execution time a lot, because instead of having to do the whole test case, testers just get presented with a PDF with all the evidence and they can look through it. And all of this is done automatically. So these reports are generated by Tosca. All the screenshots are taken by Tosca and automatically put into the report at correct sections. And then Jenkins pulls that report from Tosca and puts it available for download to everybody. And it's very nice and easy to distribute this. And the business people, the people that are actually on business end and need to validate this, don't have to interact with Tosca at all. So the testers can really focus on Tosca, and the business end can really focus on the requirements and on the validation. And the pipeline takes care of a lot of the communication, which makes things just very stable and very convenient, and which allows us to execute these things very, very quickly. Now, for a last slide, I will give back to Clemens, and he will present our learnings, our last bullet points, our knowledge that we gained, and the things that we had to come over, and what we will do better in the future in order to keep things really nice to do in a mobile testing environment with all of this integration of all the different systems.
So with that, it's a wrap, right? What did we learn from it? And I think Nikolai has already alluded quite a lot on the technical challenges we had when using Tosca and doing iPad, especially IREP testing, right? So if you think it's a no-brainer to integrate Tosca into an end-to-end continuous delivery chain, let me tell you, it's work and a hell lot of brain that is needed. We have encountered a lot of issues in trying to get federated execution with Jenkins fully integrated to Jira running. It was fun. It worked because of working directly with Tricentis, with their solution architects, to really ensure that Tosca is becoming an integral part of the way we run continuous delivery, no matter if it's commercial off the shelf or a SaaS application at Boehringer, right? The real magic of test cases starts if you go beyond isolated automation of a single functional spec. And this is what you need to think over and come up with a good plan for. The assumption that you take any out-of-the-box mobile app and just build your test cases is just plain wrong. And Nikolai alluded to it. When we first tried to automate IREP and the testing of IREP, we hit one roadblock after the other because the IDs were just not available, right? So it's really, you have to play, you have to think, and you need to work with the providers you get these applications from. Another thing that kind of struck us was an iPad really works on a single thread. So you need to account in your test cases for this, right? And Nikolai talked about get page source and the problems there, right? The pages are large. These calls will take long, and they will block your test execution. They will block the Appium server that you're using. They will block Sauce Labs. So you just need to account for that. In your test strategy, go and think about different operating system versions. It's pretty cool what Sauce Labs offers there, and make use of it. So you can test the same applications on different versions. Device starting times are in fact longer than you would expect, especially when it comes to cleanup and installation, or if you have online storage and syncing of data that is required to get your app up and running. And last but not least, when you automate across platforms, you need to ensure that partners are on board. And you also need to account for platform outages. So kind of my shout out goes to all the people at Tricentis that helped us, Marco, Suzanne, the guys at Capgemini that helped to build test cases, Sauce Labs when we hit problems with accessing iPads, when we actually used get page source all the way until we made Appium break away, and of course Jess and Arno at VEEVA, right, to really help us get the stuff automated. And last but not least, and that's sort of my final statement, Nikolai, thank you very much for all the help over the many hours and weeks and also nights to get us up and running and to make sure this vision that we have set out truly becomes reality. Thank you for that a lot. And thank you very much for everybody that listened in.
Thank you very much, Clemens. I think this very nicely concludes our presentation of what this project entitled and what it really means to automate a mobile application, and also what it means to set up a complex EDP pipeline, to set up a complex continuous integration pipeline, which can then actually be used to take a lot of work off it in the long run, but which in the short run, of course, needs a lot of expertise to get running. I thank you all very much for listening. We will stick around here for a bit in case there are any questions. You can post them in the live chat and we will take them. This video will also stay up. So if you need to come back here later, if you want to share it with anybody, that is no problem. And also, of course, we will look at the comments if there are any, and can also answer questions there. In the description, you will also find links to both Automators and Tricentis in case you're interested in what all the possibilities are, what products are available, what services we provide, and there is anything that you might have a question about, if you want an inquiry, if you want a proof of concept, if you want a screening, we do all of that, and we will be happy to assist you in all your testing needs. With that being said, have a good rest of your day, everybody.